Chapter 831 Master Neve. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. After a while, nothing surrounded the convoy but the vast expanse of rolling waves. The 40 colossal vessels moved in a narrow formation, with the fearsome flagship serving as the arrowhead of the expeditionary fleet. Hundreds of formidable cannons were aimed in all directions, their fields of fire overlapping to create a lethal exclusionary zone around the procession. Nevertheless, Sonny was not reassured. He stared at the undulating surface below for some time, a dark expression never leaving his face. Despite the grandiose magnitude of their passage, the convoy moved with a surprising measure of quietness. If not for the sound of water being displaced by the mighty bows and splashing against the alloy armor, Sonny could have closed his eyes and imagined that there were no other ships around him. Wasn't it strange that he had felt much more comfortable aboard flying ships than these far more reliable seafaring vessels? He sighed, then activated his communicator and accessed the Maritime Safety Procedures Manual provided to each member of the First Army. In the past weeks, everyone had to study the sizable document and run a few exhausting drills to familiarize themselves with the strange rules of proper naval conduct. Sonny had a better memory than most, so he practically learned the manual by heart. While its general structure was rather easy to understand and explained what passengers of the ships had to do if a ship or fleet-wide alert was issued, there were a lot of strange and seemingly esoteric rules included, as well. For example, the manual had passages like, if you start to experience recurring nightmares or experience persistent auditory hallucinations, report to the nearest Navy officer immediately, or, in case of alert level being raised to condition black, cease all activity in motion, do not produce any sounds, disturbances, or vibrations, do not summon memories, and above all else do not actively circulate soul essence, and so on. There were several alert levels, differentiated by their color. Condition black was among the highest and most dire, inferior only to condition red, which meant that the whole fleet had to prepare for an all-out battle. However, there were plenty of regulations that fell outside these established routines. Even though Sonny had no idea what most of these rules were supposed to prevent from happening, he felt a little bit calmer knowing them. Ships move between the quadrants all the time. Hell, there are even some that constantly travel between West Antarctica and South America. There's no reason to worry too much. He sighed, then shook his head dejectedly and decided to leave the upper deck. Whether Sonny liked it or not, he was going to have to spend the next several weeks at sea. Letting paranoia get the best of him would not do anyone any good. There was a lot for him to accomplish, still, from checking up on the Rhino to finding out what kind of facilities would be available to the cohort during this dangerous cruise, and implementing changes to the training plan. Not to mention the fact that he had to continue upgrading and augmenting the memories of his soldiers. As he walked toward the nearest hatch, Sonny suddenly spotted a lone figure standing at the bow of the ship, gazing at the vast expanse of water as he himself had been just a minute ago. The man was tall and wore a midnight blue coat that moved slightly in the wind. Beneath it was a black bodysuit much like the one Sonny was wearing, but also slightly different. It was made out of a strange material and looked much more like a wetsuit than a garment meant to be worn under armor. Although the stranger stood some distance away, Sonny could somehow feel his presence all the way near the hatch. It was subdued, deep, and mysterious, tantalizing, even. Sonny had no doubt that he was looking at another master. He hesitated for a few moments, then shrugged and decided to approach the unfamiliar ascended. As he did, the man turned around and glanced at Sonny with a wary gaze. He was around 30 years old, handsome, and with eyes of an unusual, beautiful indigo color. Strangely enough, his black hair also seemed to possess slight accents of dark blue, at least when exposed to direct sunlight. This close, the feeling of mystifying depth radiating from the stranger was more pronounced, as if most of him was hidden from sight. Sonny already had an idea of who he was looking at. He thought for a bit, and then simply said, "Good day. I am Ascended Sunless of the First Awakened Irregular Company." The man lingered for a moment, studying him. His indigo eyes seemed to be searching for something. Then, unexpectedly, a wide smile appeared on his handsome face. Ah! I am Ascended Neve, of the House of Night. He stared at Sunny with a strange expression for a few moments, and then suddenly blurted out. Are you crazy? Sunny blinked a couple of times. Neve, meanwhile, laughed and waved his hand in the air a couple of times. Sorry. I didn't, it's just that my daughter is your biggest fan. What? Utterly flabbergasted, Sunny stared at the scion of the famed great clan knight while trying his best to appear calm and composed. Eventually, he shifted slightly and forced out a question. How old is your daughter, if I may ask? Neve smiled. She's 5. A Song of Light and Darkness is her favorite movie, she must have watched it 100 times. The censored version, of course. She just adores your character. You're her idol. Ah. I really do apologize, Master Sunless. Please forgive my lack of decorum. I just got excited. The scion of the House of Night remained silent for a few moments, then suddenly produced a piece of synthetic paper and a pen from somewhere and offered them to Sunny. Sunny looked down with a deadpan expression and raised an eyebrow. What am I supposed to do with these? Master Neve stared at him for a long, awkward moment. Can I get an autograph? Please. You know, to earn some points with my daughter. Chapter 832 Heirs of the Storm. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Sunny knew how to write, of course. That said, he certainly did not have a lot of experience writing by hand, let alone had a signature, simply because people at large, and especially those in the outskirts, almost never used paper and pens to relay information. Why would they, if everything was usually stored digitally? However, he was in a better position than most. Out there in the dream realm, many long-abandoned traditions had found a new life, so Sunny managed to scribble down his name on the piece of synthetic paper with at least some semblance of finesse. Handing it back to Master Neve of Night, he smiled awkwardly. Here. I hope your daughter likes it. The scion of the great clan received the piece of paper with gratitude and hid it in the pocket of his coat. Thank you very much. I am away a lot, so this will go a long way. Next time I see her, she will probably already be 6, and terribly peeved that I've been gone for so long. Coming back with a present is bound to help. He looked at Sunny with genuine mirth. Then, a knowing spark gleamed in his strange indigo eyes. Neve gestured at the ocean and asked. You are not too comfortable on water, are you? Sunny lingered for a moment, then scoffed. You must have seen the movie yourself. Is it really a surprise that I have a complicated relationship with the sea? The handsome master smiled. Oh, yes. I haven't thought about that, sorry. Still, at least you are familiar with it. Most people just don't understand. He did not have to say what exactly it was that people failed to understand. For a moment, the two men shared a strange feeling of closeness. Both had known the unfathomable dread of the depths, which was a rare thing these days. Sunny sighed, then studied the massive silhouettes of the iron ships for a few moments, and asked. So, what are our chances of making it to Antarctica alive? Neve laughed. Well. I wouldn't worry too much if I were you. Sure, anything can happen. But this convoy is as safe as we can make it. He pointed to the especially fearsome dreadnought that moved in front of the fleet. There is a saint of the House of Night aboard the flagship. There are several nightwalkers such as I spread around the other ships. There are also at least one cohort of experienced awakened warriors of my clan on each vessel. We know what we are doing, so, very few things can threaten the fleet. It will reach Antarctica, have no doubt. The scion of the great clan lingered for a moment, then added in a more somber tone. We will have to make the journey many times, bringing the refugees away and returning with reinforcements for the government army. Each of the 4 fleets was made to be nearly indestructible. Still, that doesn't mean that our passengers can relax. Keep your wits about you, Master Sunless, and do remember the rules formulated in the safety manual. We put them there for a reason. Sunny looked at the handsome man and smiled. Oh, you don't have to worry about that. I have already memorized the whole thing, more or less. I may be lacking in many regards, but being unreasonably paranoid is not one of them. Neve smiled. That is a truly remarkable trait to have. I wish more people were that unreasonable. Sunny chatted with the Nightwalker for a few more minutes before taking his leave. Master Neve had turned out to be unexpectedly friendly and pleasant to be around. He was not at all like the arrogant representatives of the other great legacy clans. By the end of their talk, Sunny felt a lot better about his current circumstances. He had also grown a bit fascinated with the House of Night. The third great clan had always been a mystery to him. Nightwalkers did not enjoy the patronage of a sovereign, but wielded an irreplaceable power. That unique advantage had carved a place for them at the very top of human hierarchy. But what was that advantage, exactly? After meeting a scion of the great clan Night in person, Sunny all but confirmed his suspicion. The feeling Neve gave him was somewhat similar to what he had experienced twice before, one time in the shrine at the 4th level of the Ebony Tower, the other time in the Great Hall of the Night Temple. Both were dedicated to Storm God, the deity of depths, oceans, darkness, stars, travel, guidance, and disaster. The aspects of the goddess of the black skies were all eerily related to the role the House of Night played in human society, and Sunny did not think that it was a coincidence. His previous guess seemed to have been correct. It was all but certain now that the founder of the great clan, an enigmatic awakened of the first generation known as Nightwalker, had inherited the lineage of Storm God and somehow shared its power with the rest of the House of Night. So, then, all 6 divine lineages are accounted for. House of Night had inherited the lineage of Storm God. Immortal Flame had inherited the lineage of Sun God. Valor had inherited the lineage of War God. Song had most likely inherited the lineage of Beast God, that was clear from what he knew about Saishan, the adopted daughter of Ki Song. Sunny had been meant to inherit the lineage of Shadow God, but it was devoured by Bloodweave. That only left the most elusive of the 6 divinities, Heart God, and the most elusive of the sovereigns, Asterion. Of course, Sunny could be wrong. Ki Song might have been the heir of Heart God, instead, while Asterion might have been the heir of Beast God, or lacked a lineage entirely. But what were the chances? That is all great. But what the hell does it all mean? What were divine lineages, exactly? Did they have any purpose except for bestowing their wielders with additional power? Were they just chance remnants of ancient bloodlines, or something that had been left behind for a reason? More importantly, now that one of the 6 divine bloodlines had been hijacked by the forbidden lineage of a meddling demon, how would that affect things? Sunny had no idea. Shaking his head, he descended into the metal depths of the giant battleship and reunited with his shadows, which had been exploring the vessel all that time. One way or another, I will find out later. Right now, however, I should really go and take a look at the rhino. Sunny hastened his steps and scowled. After all the contribution points I sank into it, the damn thing better be good. Chapter 833 Rhino. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The vehicle stable of the battleship took up a whole lesser cargo hold. Calling it lesser, of course, did not do the space justice. It was a vast metal hull filled with all types of heavy machinery and bustling human activity. Feeling the floor sway slightly beneath him, Sunny walked along various cradles, each holding a powerful engine of war, until he reached the one assigned to his cohort. There, he finally saw the rhino. Sunny remained motionless for a while, studying the formidable vehicle. The armored personnel carrier was angular and stocky, with heavy plates of composite alloy armor covering its solid frame. Its design was stout, sleek, and strangely predatory. The whole machine was almost the size of a train car, with 6 mighty wheels supporting its overbearing weight. Each massive wheel was as tall as a human and as tough as the alloy hull of the Rhino. A lot of engineering went into making the APC as mobile as possible. Not only were the wheels connected to an extremely robust suspension system, they were also attached to a set of short integrated limbs that could be extended from the frame of the vehicle to raise its profile and maneuverability. The APC also possessed powerful boosters that allowed it to sustain brief bursts of autonomous levitation, hop over short distances, or soften the blow of landing from height. It could even move across water as an amphibious vessel, not that Sunny had any plans to do so. And the feature that gave the Rhino its peculiar name was a massive steel wedge that was raised slightly above its wide snout. This plow could be lowered down to the ground, turning the APC into a semblance of a heavy siege ram. With this sharp catcher lowered, the alloy beast looked like it was capable of tearing through walls, piles of debris, natural obstacles, and the flesh of the nightmare creatures with equal ease. Sunny studied it with a dark sense of glee. Well, all right. I have to admit, it does look good. He lowered his eyes and looked at Kim and Samara, who were busy inspecting the vehicle. He walked over to his technicians and asked in a neutral tone. So, what's the status? Samara glanced up from the screen of her communicator, where a diagnostic program was displaying the results of a series of complicated tests. She offered him a small smile. Everything seems to be in order, Captain. He's a real beast. Kim affectionately patted the surface of the APC, which had been painted in a gray camouflage pattern. This is a superb machine. Rhino is really fast despite being burdened by heavy armor, highly maneuverable, and has exceedingly durable internals. With the expensive upgrades we procured, he had become nothing short of a beast, indeed. Sunny blinked a couple of times, coming to terms with the fact that his personnel carrier was, apparently, a he. Kim, meanwhile, shifted from foot to foot and said in a tentative tone. Would you like to take a look inside, Captain? Sunny looked at her nonchalantly and shrugged. Sure. Of course I want to take a look inside. What kind of question is that? He entered the Rhino through an opened hatch, climbed a set of steep steps, and found himself in the interior of the massive vehicle. Everything there was Spartan, highly utilitarian, and designed with maximum durability in mind. It was clear that he was inside a military machine, and yet, Sunny couldn't help but feel that he was surrounded by pure luxury. Maybe it was because he knew how much all this seemingly unassuming equipment cost. The front of the Rhino was dedicated to a slightly raised pilot's cabin, where Luster was currently studying various control panels and switches with an excited expression. There was enough space in there for a couple of additional seats, as well. The reinforced windshield was long and narrow, but offered almost a panoramic view of the surroundings. Of course, there were plenty of monitors displaying the feeds from various external cameras and sensors, as well. The middle of the vehicle was dedicated to a modest living space. There was a small lounge area where the crew could rest and spend time together, a compact galley, and a partitioned hygiene compartment. 6 sleeping nooks were situated on the opposing walls. Sunny could already imagine the competition for who would get the bottom bunks. Of course, each of these bunks could actually function as a dedicated sleeping pod, should the need arise. Behind the lounge area was a cargo hold that also served as the armory and integrated a high-tech engineering workstation. The engineering compartment itself was situated below the floor and ran the whole length of the vehicle. Finally, the very back of the Rhino was taken by the command and communication suite. There was a large holographic table, a powerful console connected to the antennae array of the APC, and a set of monitors that received the same input as the ones in the pilot's cabin. Most importantly, behind all that was an alcove where Sunny's own bed was situated, complete with a privacy partition and a dedicated storage space. The mattress was the very best the first evacuation army could offer. He grinned, imagining how pleasant it would be to sleep on that thing. This is actually better than what I have back home. Such an addition was not simply to please the officers. As an Ascended, Sunny possessed an ability that his soldiers lacked. He did not have to travel to the dream realm every time he fell asleep. What it actually meant was that his soldiers were going to be utterly defenseless while they slept. Even if a swarm of nightmare creatures attacked the rhino, they would not wake up. He was the only one who could guard the cohort no matter what happened. A staggered sleeping schedule was supposed to help with this problem to a degree, but Sunny had no illusions about how often he would get the opportunity to properly rest. Which meant that the rare occasions when he did get a chance to take a nap had to be as comfortable and efficient as possible. Sunny walked around the rhino for a bit, trying to suppress a satisfied grin as he studied the layout. Eventually, he approached his personal alcove and sat down on the soft bed. There, he glanced at his shadows and smiled. Not bad, huh? The shadows stared at him silently. A few moments later, the happy one energetically raised both hands, showing him 2 thumbs. Sunny nodded. Yes, indeed. I like it, too. Chapter 834 Cohesion. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Over the next few days, Sunny slowly grew somewhat accustomed to life aboard a giant, floating metal coffin. Of course, the thought of being separated from the bottomless abyss of dark water by just a few layers of alloy was not too comforting, but at least he did not think about it too much anymore. What helped Sunny the most was the fact that he was simply too busy to entertain frivolous thoughts. His schedule was packed to the limit. There was so much he had to do. Most of his days were still dedicated to trying to improve the level of cooperation between the members of the cohort. Now that they had left the northern quadrant, there was no spacious gymnasium for them to practice in. The Dreamscape pods were a thing of the past now, too. Of course, there were some facilities available on the giant battleship, as well as the whole upper deck, but none of it was sufficient to put 6 elite awakened fighters through the paces. Still, there was a lot they could do to learn how to work well together. From low-intensity training to mental exercises and games, anything that could give the members of the cohort a glimpse into how their comrades thought and acted was a step in the right direction. Sunny's insights that he had gained thanks to Shadow Dance helped a lot, as well. Slowly but surely, his soldiers were clicking together and learning how to fight side by side. Belle's swift and mercurial nature, Dorn's solid and calculated approach, Quinton's stalwart persistence, Samara's steadiness and deadly aim, Kim's mastery of sight and quiet competence, Luster's spirit and inexhaustible bravado, guided by Sunny, all of it was slowly melting together. The cohort had not reached the point where they could move as a single organism yet, but at least they were already able to reinforce each other's strengths while simultaneously covering each other's weaknesses. Sunny had gained a deeper understanding of their powers, as well. For example, Belle's ability to sharpen his sword was actually more complicated than he had thought. As it turned out, the actual effect surrounded the blade with an incredibly thin, invisible displacement field instead of actually making the edge sharper. Kimmy could not only share visual perception between several people, but also mix and match it as the situation demanded. She could see the weaknesses of the enemy, but simply channeling her point of view to a fighter in the middle of furious battle would have been too disorienting. Instead, she was able to transfer only the vision of the vulnerabilities, almost like a composite overlay that lighted the chosen spots up. Luster could speed up the soul essence recovery, both for himself and his allies. Strangely enough, the better he knew a person, the more distance he could maintain between himself and the target while channeling the beneficial effect. If there was one flaw to his ability, it was that it did not seem to work on Sunny. As it turned out, Shadow Essence did not react to Luster's presence at all, which was a big disappointment, considering that Sunny had stripped himself of Serpent support in order to protect Rain. Damnation, why did I even recruit this fool? Despite being upset, Sunny had to reluctantly admit that this was not a big issue. Luster's unique and useful ability would not have had a great effect on him, anyway. The young awakened was not able to dramatically affect the much more potent essence of a master, let alone of an abnormal one who possessed 4 cores. When Sunny was not training his cohort, he was busy modifying their memories. The process was long, arduous, and complicated, but he was steadily making progress. He had imbued Bel's sword with a potent, but passive sharpening effect of the enchanted straight razor. He had somehow managed to transfer the feather of truth, enchantment of the mantle of the underworld to Dorn's sledgehammer. The latter was an especially incredible achievement, considering that the weave of the onyx armor was one of the most intricate and complicated he had ever seen. Even more impressive were the 6 charms that he had presented to the members of the cohort. Each carried an altered version of the single enchantment of the memory of ice, which was supposed to raise their resistance to cold. While the effect was much weaker than that of his personal charm, that was exactly what made this accomplishment so important. It was the first time Sunny succeeded in not only copying an enchantment, but also modifying it. While the memory of ice was more powerful, it was an ascended charm that devoured a lot of essence to sustain its effect. The version Sunny imbued into the 6 weaker charms was more modest, but also much less demanding. His awakened soldiers were going to be able to keep it active more or less permanently, unless their reserves were completely drained. If there was one thing that he had failed to do, it was turning Samara's destructive rifle into a memory. Sunny had really wanted to, but no matter how hard he tried, the high-tech weapon was just too intricate, complicated, and contained too many moving parts. There was a limit to what Sunny could achieve. The more complex the structure of the object was, the larger its size and mass, the harder it was to integrate the rudimentary weave into it. Perhaps if he knew more, he would have known how to overcome this limitation. But as things stood, Sunny had to abandon this particular ambition. Oh well. His dreams of turning the rhino into a memory were utterly shattered. It had already been a week after the departure from the northern quadrant. Sunny was currently in his private cabin, sitting on the bed as he stared dejectedly at the heavy rifle. The battleship vibrated subtly around him, but its corridors were enveloped in silence. This far into the night, most members of the First Army were fast asleep. Sunny himself had not slept in a long while. Of course, as an ascended, he could easily last a week without sleep. The problem was that it was already his 2nd week. Or was it 3rd? With a sigh, he put the heavy rifle aside and threw the unused soul shards into the maw of the covetous coffer. To hell with it. I need some rest. He yawned and put his head on a soft pillow. Suddenly, all the exhaustion of the past weeks descended upon him, making his thoughts slow and sluggish. A few moments later, Sunny was already asleep. And after what felt like a minute, he was rudely awoken by a loud and persistent sound. Irritated, he turned on his other side and tried to dive back into the rejuvenating darkness. Bastards! Quiet down. But no matter how hard Sunny tried to continue to sleep, he couldn't. After a while, he sat up and listened to the noise with a resentful expression on his face. He could clearly hear several voices. By the sound of it, they all belonged to young women. And these women were. Sunny gritted his teeth. Singing. Who the hell sings in the middle of the night? People are trying to sleep here, damn it. Chapter 835 Siren's Song. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Sunny sat silently on his bed for a while, irritated by the fact that someone had disturbed his sleep. With singing, no less. Slowly, however, his expression softened. Well, at least they have good voices, yeah. The young women sang beautifully. Their voices flowed and resonated with each other, creating harmonies that made him feel tingly. The song was neither sad nor happy, instead, it made Sunny feel a deep, poignant longing. A wistful sigh escaped from his lips. Maybe I should go introduce myself. Since these beauties were having a party, surely they wouldn't mind some company. Sunny lingered for a few moments, then frowned. Slowly, he looked down and studied his shadows, which were silently trembling. His face darkened. There is just this one problem. How the hell was he able to hear the singing so clearly? His cabin was separated from other neighboring compartments by thick alloy bulkheads. The entrance hatch was securely fastened, isolating him from the rest of the battleship. No sound should have been able to penetrate inside so easily. Suddenly, an old memory surfaced from the depths of his mind. For some reason, Sonny remembered how the members of the cohort had sealed their eyes with wax before traversing the dark river below the hollow mountains. Odysseus. His frown turned into a deep scowl. Sonny hesitated for a moment, then summoned the undying chain. As the lusterless, bleak steel of the slender armor weaved itself from light and encased his body, his thoughts seemed to have turned a little clearer. The chains of longing, enchantment provided the wearer with a high amount of protection against mind attacks. However, contrary to his expectation, the beautiful singing was not affected at all. Sonny could still hear it clearly. He still felt moved by the alluring voices. Wait, what language are they singing in? Strangely, Sonny found himself unable to understand the words of the melodious song. Even stranger, he had somehow failed to notice that fact earlier. The words of the unknown language seemed to seep straight into his mind, unobstructed. They echoed and resonated with each other there, making him feel a bit weird. However, their influence was not invasive or harmful. Instead, it was rather pleasant. Sonny blinked. I'm hearing voices. Then, he tilted his head a little. Does hearing voices constitute an auditory hallucination? Wasn't there a rule concerning exactly these circumstances in the safety manual? Right, he was supposed to immediately inform the nearest Navy officer in case something like that happened. Sonny sighed, then stood up. No matter how much his heart desired to meet the beautiful singers, there was no way he was going to follow the call of their soothing song. There was already someone who was aggravatingly adept at tugging on his heartstrings. His heart was all but overcrowded. Sonny left the cabin and went to find an officer to report his hallucinations to. After a few steps, his foot suddenly made a splash, as if it landed into a shallow puddle. Looking down, Sonny saw a thin layer of clear water covering the floor of the passage ahead of him. His scowl deepened. It was still night, so the passageways of the colossal battleship were mostly empty. Of course, activity never ceased on a vessel of this size. The crew slept in shifts to make sure that a complete complement of sailors and specialists always tended to its internal systems and manned the posts. One such post was right ahead, behind a corner. There was not a soul around, and the thin layer of water made Sonny feel uneasy. After hesitating for a moment, he sent one of his shadows to take a look. To his relief, the security checkpoint seemed in perfect order. A junior officer in a blue uniform was standing near the wall, studying the panel mounted on it, or maybe simply staring at the wall in boredom. Does he not see all that water? Or, was the water a hallucination, as well? Sonny gritted his teeth, then walked forward and approached the security checkpoint. Excuse me. The officer turned around and looked at him without any particular expression. Yes. The man was seemingly in his early 30s, with pale skin and dark, slicked-back hair. There was nothing particularly memorable about him, except for how still his face seemed to be. Sonny sighed, and then said awkwardly. The safety manual says to inform the nearest officer if I hear voices. Well, I do. Hear them. So. The impassive man suddenly became more lively. A strange gleam appeared in his eyes. Oh. What do you hear? Sonny rubbed his face. Singing. I hear beautiful singing. The officer stared at him for a few moments, then nodded. I see. In that case, please follow me to the upper deck. Sonny shifted his weight to take a step forward, but then lingered for a moment and leaned slightly to the side instead. Glancing behind the naval officer, he took a short glance at the man's shadow. The shadow appeared exactly how it was supposed to appear. It swayed slightly on the surface of the water, staring at Sonny as shadows often did. Nevertheless, he felt very disturbed, for some reason. His intuition was not exactly ringing an alarm, but it had become strangely alert. Sonny looked back to the officer. Why the upper deck? The man smiled. Please, follow me to the upper deck. Something is wrong. Sonny frowned, trying to understand what was making him uncomfortable. Was it the Navy officer's unblinking stare? Unblinking, yes. The man wearing the uniform of a junior officer had not blinked once since they started talking. Sonny stared at him for a few moments, and then took a tentative step back. That I'd rather not. The polite smile slowly disappeared from the officer's pale face. His dark eyes turned a little hollow. Oh. As Sonny backed away under the man's glossy stare, his communicator suddenly vibrated and let out a sharp sound. The Navy officer did not seem to react to it at all. Sonny, on the other hand, recognized the sound immediately. Crap. In the next moment, the lights in the passageway blinked in a specific pattern and simultaneously went out, submerging it in utter darkness. The battleship vibrated intensely for a split second, and then went still as its reactors were shut down. Absolute silence enveloped the mighty vessel. Condition Black had gone into effect. Chapter 836 Black Water. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. As the lights went out and the reactors of the colossal vessel grew quiet, Sonny froze. His shadow sense extended outward as he sensed other people doing the same. Condition Black meant that the fleet was on the cusp of dire danger. After the alert was issued, every member of the First Army aboard the 40 ships had to cease all activity. They weren't supposed to make any noises or movements. They were not even allowed to agitate their essence in any way. The problem was, the strange Navy officer was still mere meters away from Sonny. He, too, stood motionlessly in the darkness. His head was lowered, so Sonny could not see the man's face. He could only hear his breathing. It sounded wet. Don't do it. Don't. Suddenly, the man's shoulders twitched. Frozen a few steps away, Sonny gritted his teeth. Curse it all. The officer swayed slightly, and then took a step forward. The water covering the floor parted, allowing him to move without making any sound. The air grew colder. A resentful expression appeared on Sonny's face. Don't move. Don't make noise. Don't circulate essence. Don't summon memories. What was he supposed to do? Break the regulations of Condition Black and risk putting the fleet under threat, or remain still and allow the officer, or whatever it was pretending to be one, approach him? Sonny could not summon any weapons or use his stronger aspect abilities. Simply backing away was against the rules. Damnation. The man, meanwhile, took another step. Now, only a couple of meters separated them. Sonny tensed. To hell with this. The moment the bastard tried to make a sudden movement, he would learn not to mess with a master. High alert or not, Sonny was not going to let the creepy thing touch him. The singing voices suddenly grew louder. He even thought that he started to understand the meaning of some of the words of their beautiful song. The man took another step towards Sonny, and suddenly disappeared. For a few moments, he was surrounded by nothing but darkness. Where? And then, the water quietly splashed right behind him. What? His shadows did not see anything. Before Sonny could turn around, something flew through the passageway and collided with an invisible object behind him, producing a blinding flash of light. He was thrown off his feet and landed on the wet floor in a roll. Almost at the same time, the rising voices abruptly disappeared, and the battleship trembled as its reactors came back online. The lamps in the corridor ignited, drowning it in light. Jumping back to his feet as the cruel sight was manifesting itself into reality in his hand, Sonny looked ahead and saw a familiar figure pressing something dark and slithering into the metal bulkhead. Master Neve had lost his midnight blue coat somewhere and was now wearing only his black wetsuit. There was a strange bone knife in his hand. Impaled on that knife was a Before Sunny could make sense of what the creature looked like, it suddenly lost its shape and turned into a formless mass of black water, which then fell to the floor and formed a puddle. Neve's indigo eyes shone with dark light as he turned his head. "Master Sunless. Are you all right?" Sunny cautiously nodded. "What? What the hell was that thing?" The scion of the great clan knight opened his mouth, but before he could answer, the battleship around them shuddered, and a muffled thunder sounded somewhere in the distance. The main railgun was firing. Neve shook his head. "No time right now. Check on your cohort." With that, the handsome man seemed to disappear. A moment later, the lamps illuminating the passageway blinked and changed their color to ominous red. Condition red, all out battle. Sunny flinched, and then hurriedly used his communicator to send his soldiers an order to gather near the Rhino. Before he joined them, however, he hesitated for a moment, and then stepped through the shadows, appearing in a secluded spot of the upper deck. It took him a moment to comprehend what was going on. The night was suddenly obliterated by hundreds of bright flashes as hundreds of cannons roared, discharging an endless rain of steel and tungsten rounds into the ocean. A large section of it had changed color at some point, becoming absolutely black. Although the force of the wind had not increased, the black waves seemed taller and more violent than those rolling far away. They reached toward the ships like fingers of an unknown monster. In an especially blinding flash, the main cannon of the flagship of the naval convoy fired, causing countless tons of the black water to be displaced and rise high into the sky like a colossal pillar. A second later, the thunderous roar of its discharge reached Sunny and made him grimace. The scope of the heavy bombardment was truly mind-boggling. However, it did not seem to do much except for slowing down the churning black water a little. As Sunny watched, he noticed human figures diving into the waves from the tall decks of the ships. They were the cohorts of Awakened at the House of Night had stationed on the 40 ships. Although the flagship was situated at a considerable distance from where Sunny stood, he still noticed a lonely figure jumping into the ocean from its towering bow. For some reason, that diver in particular demanded attention. A moment before the figure hit the waves, it shimmered slightly. Then, something massive and ferocious dove under the water. A giant black fin cut the waves before disappearing into the depths. The Saint Guardian of the convoy had joined the battle. Sunny stood among the thunderous roars of the firing cannons and stared at the rolling black waves, awed and dismayed. Slowly, a grim expression appeared on his face. "There is no place for me in a battle like this. None at all. What could an ant like him do when it seemed like the heaven itself went to war against the ocean?" His eyes gleamed in the darkness. "Not yet, at least." With that thought, he swallowed the bitter feeling of powerlessness and disappeared into the shadows, leaving to join his soldiers. Tonight, all they could do was stick together and hope to live until the morning. Chapter 837 Naval Engagement. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. The vehicle stable of the battleship was quiet and tense. Hundreds of people were moving with somber haste as they secured various tools and pieces of machinery. Thankfully, most of the vehicles were safely fastened in their cradles. As Sunny stepped out of the shadows, he had to make way for a lumbering loader that thundered past, carrying a half-disassembled bulk of a massive engine. All around them, the colossal vessel was trembling as its cannons continued to fire without stop. Muffled sounds of heavy ordnance sliding into the feeding mechanism spread through the deck. From time to time, an especially loud noise announced that a powerful torpedo or a salvo of ballistic missiles were launched from their nests. Sunny was not the only person who felt a grim sense of powerlessness as the titanic battle continued to unfold in this nameless patch of the deep, dark ocean. While the crews of the battleships and the Awakened serving the House of Night were locked in a furious fight with whatever ancient horror it was that had attacked the convoy, the 100,000 soldiers of the First Army had nothing to do but wait and beg the dead gods for salvation. He was better off than most, at least. Sunny had left one of his shadows on the upper deck to observe the battle. Even though it could only see the turbulent surface of the seething water and not the true confrontation that was taking place deep beneath, there was some relief in knowing what was going on. The rest did not enjoy such a privilege. They could only infer what was happening beyond the metal confines of the vehicle stable by paying attention to the sounds and vibrations spreading through the ship. Occasionally, a loud and startling bang would roll through the massive compartment, indicating that something had collided against the hull of the vessel from the outside. Full of dark thoughts, Sonny walked toward the cradle holding the rhino. Many people threw furtive glances at the passing master, hoping to find comfort and reassurance in his authority. Noticing that, he made an effort to hide his unease and project an image of absolute confidence. It seemed to have worked, calming the people down a little. Poor fools. What can I do that they can't? Reaching the rhino, Sonny saw four Awakens standing near it with reserved expressions on their faces. Dorn, Quinton, Kim, Luster. He frowned. Where are Bell and Samara? Quinton straightened a little when he saw his superior approaching. They are in the dream realm, Captain. We have already secured their bodies in the sleeping pods inside the rhino. Sonny sighed. Well, it was not outside the expectations. In fact, Sonny had lucked out, considering that only two of his subordinates had happened to be asleep when the battle started. At least everyone is alive. Sonny had almost expected to find Luster missing. The dolt was exactly the kind of guy to be lured to his death by a vision of young beauties singing sweet songs. He stared at the young man, who shifted uncomfortably under his gaze, and then turned to the rhino. The armored APC was, theoretically, seaworthy. So, it was going to be their last hope in case the battleship went down. Getting the massive machine out of the vehicle stable was a tall task, of course. In fact, Sonny doubted that it was possible at all. He glanced at the sealed blast doors of the giant compartment, then at the solid alloy bulkheads. Would he be able to tear through the hull of the ship, should the need arise? After thinking for a few moments, Sonny judged that he stood a good chance of breaching the heavy armor of the colossal vessel, provided that he used his most powerful memories and had enough time. However, there was a big difference between creating an opening that a person could squeeze through and one that a vehicle the size of the rhino could. Things would have been different if Nephis was here. With her flames and the shadows resonating with each other and augmenting Sonny, he could have ripped through the thick armor plates with ease. Better yet, Changing Star could have simply melted a giant hole through the side of the battleship. But she wasn't here. There was also the mass of black water outside. Why was he even entertaining these thoughts? Sonny sighed and shook his head. Get comfortable. This will probably take a while. His soldiers obeyed, sitting down on crates or leaning against the side of the rhino. However, none of the four looked particularly at ease. Luster lingered for a moment, and then asked in a cautious tone. Captain, sorry, but what exactly is going on? Sonny shrugged. Something big and scary is trying to take a bite out of the convoy, what else? Don't worry too much. House of Night probably has things under control. I personally saw their saint joining the battle. Despite the precarious situation, Luster's eyes suddenly gleamed with excitement. Really? Wow. I hope I can see a saint fight, one day. Sonny's face turned bleak as he threw a dark glance at the young man. Be careful what you wish for, fool. If you are ever close enough to see saints fight, then something has definitely gone horribly wrong. Believe me. I should know. Luster opened his mouth to respond, but at that moment, something collided against the hull of the ship again, making him flinch and lose his train of thought. Despite the fact that these loud bangs had been occasionally resounding across the vehicle stable for some time now, each was still extremely jarring. People trapped in the vast compartment could not treat them with indifference, no matter how much they might have wished to. Still, slowly but surely, they were growing accustomed to the startling noise of the collisions. This last one, though. Sonny scowled. The last one was different. He slowly turned around and stared at a certain spot on the opposite wall of the stable. Was Sonny imagining it, or did the bulkhead look a little deformed? Before he could finish the thought, something collided against the ship once again, and the alloy wall visibly bent inward. Chapter 838 Bang! You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Crap. As hundreds of petrified people watched in fear, one of the sections of the giant compartment's outer wall bent slightly. An ugly deformity appeared on it, and as the echo of the loud and jarring bang died down, they heard the sound of water rushing into the narrow gaps between the different layers of the battleship's armored hull. A dark expression appeared on Sonny's face. His fingers twitched, and then he turned his head slightly. "On your feet, soldiers." Dorn, Quinton, Kim and Luster rose, ready for battle. However, there was a subtle sense of hesitation hiding behind their masks of professionalism and composure. As elites of the government forces, they knew how to fight against nightmare creatures, other awakened, and horrors of all kinds. But how were they supposed to fight the ocean? A moment later, something crashed into the side of the ship with a thunderous bang once again, making the indentation in the bulkhead of the vehicle stable grow more pronounced. People that were closest to it shuddered and backed away. Some turned around and ran. Soon, the space around the damaged section of the wall became completely empty. Everyone in the large compartment had moved as far away from it as they could, pressing against the opposite wall and staring at the massive deformity. A second passed in utter silence, then another. Then, one more. All that could be heard was the sound of rushing water. Someone cursed in a stifled bang. As several people yelped, the wall bent inward even more, its misshapen portion growing in size and reaching slightly deeper into the vehicle stable. A loud, deep groan of contorting metal rolled through the air, reverberating in their very bones. "Captain!" Kim paled as he stared at the deformed bulkhead. Sonny felt her aspect ability brushing against his mind, and then his perception of the world changed. Everything was largely the same, but the damaged wall became tinted by several subdued colors. It was as if a mad painter had vandalized it with an unsteady brush. Most of the wall remained metal gray, but closer to the massive dent, the armored alloy turned anxious orange and pale red. A small patch of the red was vibrant and vivid, instead. Sonny gritted his. Bang! 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 3 consecutive strikes crashed into the outer hull, exacerbating the damage and making the wall bend even more. People screamed and tried to get even further away from it, but there was simply nowhere for them to go. Some eyed the exit from the vehicle stable, while some stared at the contorted bulkhead, frozen still. Somehow, it still held. The metal groaned once more, but endured. Nothing happened for a dozen seconds. Then, another blow crashed into the damaged section of the hull, and the wall bent a little more. As it did, a thin crack appeared right where the alloy had been painted vibrant red. A single drop of black water seeped through the crack and rolled down. Hundreds of people watched the drop with horror written on their faces. Before the next strike tore the hull open, however, a tide of shadows suddenly rose and rushed toward the deformed wall as a wave. Converging on the damaged section, the wave splattered across its surface and then somehow solidified, turning into an improvised brace. Sonny grunted, feeling the strain of keeping such a heavy mass of shadows tangible. It was well within his limit, though, if plugging the leak was the only thing he had to do. The problem was that the crushing blows against the dented bulkhead did not stop coming. One after another, they impacted against it, sending tremors running through the entire vehicle stable. Sonny had to keep exerting opposite pressure to keep the wall intact. It was as if he was trying to brace a castle gate as a heavy ram was pounding on it from the other side. Keeping shadows tangible was hard, but forcing them to continuously press forward with that much force was even harder. Clenching his fists, Sonny looked at his subordinates and said in a strained voice. "Dorn, help me push the brace against the bulkhead. Quinton, try to use your aspect to repair the cracks. Luster, Keep Dorn and Quinton supplied with essence, transfer your own to them if one or both come close to running out. Then, he turned to the rest of the humans gathered in the vehicle stable and barked. What are you staring at? Make yourself useful, fools. Those of you who are awakened with useful aspects, help if you can. Those of you who are mundane, there are literally tons of equipment and handy machinery in this damned compartment. Even a complete idiot can find a way to reinforce the hull with all that gear, so get to work. The people stared at him for a split second. Then, Dorn and Quinton dashed toward the shadow brace. This prompted the others to start moving, as well. Another bang rolled through the spacious compartment, but no one paid it any attention. Now that Sonny broke the veil of fear that had paralyzed the members of the First Army, everyone got busy making sure that the bulkheads held. With the mass of shadows reinforcing the most damaged section, it was not too hard for them to make sure that several smaller dents that soon appeared elsewhere never broke. The immediate crisis passed. The people in the vehicle stable survived. Now, all that remained was to wait and see if they would be able to continue staying alive in the coming hours. They did. After what felt like an eternity of intense and terrifying struggle, the battle outside finally started showing signs of slowing down. Sonny, who was slowly growing concerned about his reserves of essence, let out a sigh of relief. Through his shadow on the upper deck, he could see that the fleet had escaped from the vast blotch of black water that marred the surface of the ocean. The cannons were slowly ceasing their bombardment, and the crews of the battleships had already started evaluating the damage. A giant shape rose from the depths and broke the surface of the water as it jumped into the air. Sonny saw a glimpse of a creature that resembled a monstrous killer whale, with its black and white hide torn and showing many signs of an intense confrontation against an unknown and ferocious enemy. Then, it shimmered and turned into a tiny silhouette of a human, who then tiredly climbed onto the deck of the flagship and disappeared. More human figures emerged from the water and returned aboard the ships of the convoy. Master Neve was among them. The handsome man climbed onto the deck not too far away from where Sonny's shadow was hiding and sat down with an exhausted expression. Drops of water were falling from his black hair. His wetsuit appeared more ragged than it had been when they first met, but the scion of the House of Night did not seem to bear any serious wounds. Soon, his indigo eyes shined as they reflected the first rays of sunshine that broke through the eastern horizon. A new day had come. The fearsome battle was over. Chapter 839 Unholy Blood. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. In the end, none of the 40 colossal ships had been lost. Some received moderate damage to their hulls, but the high compartmentalization and the rugged engineering of the war vessels prevented them from going down. As the fleet escaped the vast blot of black water, it continued moving south without ever slowing down. In fact, the reactors were sent into a controlled overload to enhance the speed of the convoy even further and quickly increased the distance between it and the latent danger. As the battered ships cut the waves, thousands of crewmates were assigned to repair brigades that started patching up the torn sections of the hulls. None of them paid any attention to the fact that the fleet was still in transit, hinting that this precarious type of work was not new to them. The rows of cannons were checked and reloaded. New missiles and torpedoes were slotted into the empty nests. The wounded were moved to infirmaries, and the dead were given burials at sea. Despite the frightening scope of the battle, not too many humans had lost their lives. Things could have been different if the awakened of the House of Night had not acted so swiftly. A few days later, Sonny was resting in the officer's lounge of the scarred battleship as he chatted with Master Neve. Since there were no other ascendants stationed on the vessel, the two sometimes kept each other company. So, anyway, the giant just whacked the creepy skull with his hammer. Boom. Let me tell you, at that moment, I was glad that my pants were already wet. I don't know if that thing died or not, but it did not bother us after that. The scion of the great clan looked at him with an amused expression. The dark sea of the forgotten shore has to be a great titan then, at least. Sonny shrugged. That is what I think, as well. But who can say for sure? That whole place is weird. He hesitated for a moment, and then asked. Do you think that it is connected to the Black Water? What is that thing, anyway? Neve's expression dimmed a little. Well, no one really knows. We have stumbled on the Black Water many times, both in the real world and in the dream realm. It is one of the more prominent hazards in the storm sea. Some think that it is a type of nightmare creature, some think that it is a powerful terror that had been torn into numerous pieces, thousands of years ago. Some even think that is the blood of an ancient, long-dead titan. He shook his head and sighed. In any case, everyone agrees that it is best to avoid it. The Black Water is not really sentient, so hiding from it is not too hard. It's just that this convoy is too damn large. There are too many souls, too many awakened. Their scent attracted it, as well as all the abominations that dwell within it. Luckily, most of them were not too powerful, this time. The handsome master thought for a bit. I don't think that the Black Water is the same as the dark sea of the Forgotten Shore, though. They seem similar on the surface, but that sea of yours is much more vast and powerful. It is a miracle that you and your friends managed to seal it, as mere sleepers. Sunny glanced at Neve with a somber expression. It was not a miracle. Countless thousands of young men and women had died on the Forgotten Shore across 2 decades to uncover the secrets that eventually allowed us to seal the Dark Sea. Many of them would have been pillars of humanity by now, if they had survived. We just finished what they had started. The First Lord and his cohort, the members of the Dream Army, even Gunlog and his lieutenants. If not for their contributions, Nephice and Sunny would have never been able to lay siege to the Crimson Spire and conquer it. The scion of the House of Night sighed. Most problems can be solved if you throw enough bodies at them. Hopefully, the Antarctica campaign will be different. It had to be, considering that no amount of bodies would have been enough to bury a problem of that magnitude. Sunny grimaced. How long before we reach it, anyway? Neve shifted slightly and smiled. Conditions are good. If all goes well, a week at most. Then, he leaned forward and added. Oh, by the way. I just received the news. The government is going to be announcing the voluntary mobilization in the next couple of days. The second evacuation army will already be starting to form by the time you guys make landfall. Sunny gave him a dubious look. P Alpha and D Alpha no. 10, that's great. I doubt that it will arrive to reinforce us any time soon, though. Things like that take a lot of time, not to mention that the best and the brightest that the government has to offer are already aboard these ships. With the legacy clans remaining on the sidelines, the reinforcements are not going to change much. The Nightwalker shrugged. I wouldn't be so sure that the legacy clans won't join on the fun. Sunny frowned. I've been told that neither Song nor Valor are interested in participating in the campaign. And while you guys are helping out, the House of Night is not going to send its land troops, either. Neve lingered for a moment. My clan is most useful at sea. As for the other two, indeed, they have only sent token forces to the First Army. They are acting reluctant, for now. He shook his head. However, don't let their act fool you. The legacies are definitely going to join the fight. They might not come in the first wave, or even the second, but they will come. Sunny looked at him, unconvinced. What makes you say that? The handsome master simply smiled. L.RG, have you ever met a legacy that could resist joining a glorious fight? He leaned back and let out a laugh. Especially when there are countless treasures, advancements, and spoils of all kinds to be made in the fight. Sunny's expression darkened. Legacies were known to pursue power and opportunity, indeed. If the two remaining great clans did really join the Antarctica campaign, the army would be relieved of a large part of its burden. However, with what he knew about the conflict between Song and Valor, would they be joining the struggle against the chain of nightmares to help humanity, or would they be joining it simply because Antarctica could become the most convenient battlefield for their own private war? Chapter 840 Mobilization. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. As the naval convoy moved closer and closer to Antarctica, Sonny had to accelerate his attempts to weave new and better enchantments into the memories of his soldiers. Although his rudimentary knowledge of sorcery was not nearly enough to create something truly powerful, he did manage to comprehensively upgrade the cohort's arsenal. Even if the modifications he had made were mostly modest, they were all targeted and suited the tasks facing the first irregular company. While Sonny failed to make the memories considerably stronger, he succeeded in tailoring them to the situation and, more importantly, to their users. This was already enough. Now, many of the memories that his subordinates wielded looked rather peculiar to his eyes. If he were to touch them and peer deep inside, he would see strange weaves that combined the usual strings of ethereal light with the lightless threads made of shadow essence. The sight reminded Sonny of himself and Nephis. And speaking of changing star. A few days before the fleet reached Antarctica, the world was shaken by an emergency announcement transmitted by the government. Of course, the propaganda machine managed to present the approaching cataclysm in an easily digestible and inspiring light. It was almost as if the chain of nightmares was going to be a glorious stage for heroism, valiance, and human triumph, instead of a bloody, unmitigated disaster. However, no matter how hard the government tried, people weren't that easy to fool. Although nothing much changed for the soldiers of the 1st Evacuation Army, Sonny was sure that a wave of panic was spreading through the rest of the world. The population centers of the southern quadrant were, of course, hit the worst. He could not even imagine what the people living there were going through, but other continents had to be consumed by fear, as well. If something like that could happen in Antarctica, then it could happen anywhere else. The infrastructure was bound to come under terrible strain when hundreds of millions of refugees from the besieged continent arrived, if they could even be saved. What if the evacuation failed? How did people living in South America feel, knowing that they would soon be cut off from the rest of humanity? No one was left unaffected by the shocking news. Nephis and the rest of the cohort had to have seen the announcement, as well. Knowing that the next few weeks were going to be extremely turbulent, Sonny retreated into his cabin, spent some time establishing a new tether, and then closed his eyes. It took him several minutes of intense concentration to grasp the elusive sensation of the dream realm anchor. Then, he circulated his essence in a swift, complicated pattern, and disappeared. The cabin was suddenly silent and empty. All that remained was a slight, eerie feeling of coldness that permeated the air. The ivory tower did not change much in the many months since Sonny last visited his current citadel, at least on the outside. Well, what did he expect? The Great Pagoda remained the same for thousands of years, so why would it suddenly change now? The Fire Keepers might have made it their home, but they were hardly capable of reshaping the ancient structure. The island itself, however, looked a bit different. To his surprise, Sonny noticed a large garden surrounded by a neat and tidy wooden fence. Inside, various vegetables were growing in the soil. There were also several other structures here and there, all built of wood. Some seemed like they were meant for training, some resembled simple barns. They all looked rather harmonious. That's probably Kairos and Shakti's handiwork. The two members of Cassie's former cohort had used to be artisans in the Bright Castle. One was an awakened carpenter, the other Keto's disciple with an aspect related to plants. The Ivory Island looked much more inhabited now. More than that, a familiar ship rested on the surface of the lake. Despite thousands of years that had passed since its former captain disappeared, the flying vessel remained much the same. Sonny sighed. He had been rather taken by the Rhino. But now, looking at the graceful lines of the ancient ship's hull, he couldn't help but feel that the armored APC was rather small and shabby. Whatever, it has better plumbing, anyway. That's what really matters. Somewhat vindicated, Sonny allowed himself to enjoy the peace and tranquility of the beautiful island for a few moments, and then headed toward the tower. As he did, a thundering voice boomed behind him. Sonny. He slowed down, and then cautiously turned around. Effie was traversing the green meadow with long strides. Her eyes were burning with intense emotion. Oh. A second before the huntress reached him, a swift shadow flew across the grass, and Kai suddenly landed on the ground. The archer seemed concerned. Sonny. Effie growled, interrupting him. What the hell, Sonny? Antarctica, that was your big secret. You up and left. To go to war. Without telling us. Sonny stared at them for a few moments, and then cleared his throat. Actually, it's Captain Sunless to you, citizens. Please maintain some decorum. Effie's eye twitched. Before the huntress did something that one or both of them would regret, Sonny raised his arms. All right. Yeah, I am currently in the southern quadrant. It wasn't my secret to tell, okay? The government is very particular about classified information, you know. He lingered for a moment, and then added. Besides, it's not like you can't join me. The Second Army would be very glad to get its hands on two renowned masters. The life of service is not for the faint of heart, of course, but the benefits are to die for. The huntress stared at him in stunned silence. Finally, she palmed her face and said. Doofus, no, sorry. Captain Doofus, are you really giving us the recruitment speech? Sonny looked her up and down and grinned. Well, not really. However, I do think that the uniform will suit you very much.